Oh, and good evening. It's August 19th, 2025, and we're continuing our discussion collection in our Outside the Class series. This series is from the Bible Project. It covers the entire TaNaK, also known as the Hebrew Bible, or the Old Testament. Those source videos are available for your review on TheDustyFeet.com in the Outside the Class section. Because the intent of Outside the Class is for you to listen to that in-class lecture first. These we try to keep to about 15 minutes. Make them easy to catch up on. So we're on a quest, scroll by scroll, book by book, a journey through this collection, but maybe with a fun and different twist. Our hope with the Dusty Feed is to foster discussion and help build and support communities. If you are not already connected to a community or just want to share and interact, this community has 4 primary ways to interact. 1. DustyFeet.com. That's our primary place to find everything. You are always free to comment. 2. Facebook, at The Dusty Feet. These videos and other videos are also available for comment and discussion. And 3. We have a Discord channel. The invite link is there below. Be vocal, be written, be loving. And 4, and as always, you are welcome to send an email to bob@thedustyfeet.com. These places, they will be moderated, and guidelines will be set to ensure healthy, safe discussion. And as always on the Dusty Feet, this is a place where we can safely explore the endless ways of God and the interconnection of His creation. Belief understandings may be challenged, divine misunderstandings may exist, and traditional teachings might falter as we pursue connection, context, and community with God and each other here in an environment of grace and love. And of course, before we forget, if you do find these kinds of podcasts useful, so you need to click that subscribe button. Those reminders, they just help you. But also, if you think these might be useful to others, it is when you click that like button, because it is how YouTube chooses to share these to more people if they wish. So in this series, we're going to cover the entire TaNaK, or the Old Testament, but we're going to do it in the original order of the Hebrew Scriptures. Just remember that the videos we're going to be discussing, they're just the tip of an iceberg. They're part of a learning series that I highly recommend, and all of them can be found on the Bible Project website. Because we're going to ask many questions about all kinds of things. Answers? We'll see. So Samuel, first scroll. This is our part 18. So like we ended last week, the beginning of chapter 18 is interesting because it gives us a sneak peek into what's going to follow. I guess what I mean by that is sometimes, like in a movie, you'll see a scene and then you realize as it plays on that what you saw, you're not sure when it happened, but you're very sure that what you've learned is impacting what you're seeing as the story moves on. So at the beginning of 18, we have a lot going on. I think it's worth discussing amongst ourselves afterwards as to what you think you might see in the imagery that gets brought up at the beginning of this chapter. But we're going to go from 0 to 100 really fast. We're going to go from this incredible story that we've just been covering, right? One of the most famous stories in all of Scripture, David and Goliath. And we're going to transition within a chapter to the beginning of attempting to put to death the very person that rescued, as a shepherd does his sheep, rescued the children of Israel from the Philistines. So chapter 18, at the beginning. Now it came about when he had finished speaking to Saul that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as himself. Saul took him that day and did not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him, and he gave it to David with his armor, including his sword, his bow, and his belt. So David went out wherever Saul sent him, and he prospered. Saul sent him over to the men of war, and it was pleasing in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. quick left turn for a thought, right? Um, Loving someone as yourself, right? We've heard this before, or at least we're going to hear it more in the future. It seems to ask questions to discuss, right? Especially when something comes up to discuss amongst ourselves. Someday, does this have an impact on that thought? Food for thought. Okay, back to our narrative. What we seem to have is that Jonathan and David just hit it off, right? As in Jonathan, he respected what David did. He realized God's hand in what David did, and he became connected to David. This is one of those pacts that you kind of talk about when you have two kids there, right? Where they swear they're going to be eternal friends and they poke their finger with a needle, put the blood on it, and they put their little X on it, or they write it out and say, we're going to be best buddies for the rest of our lives. Yeah. Okay, I guess that's the little Hollywood mental picture that I get sometimes when I read this, and then the taking off of his robe. Well, that's symbolic in so many ways, right? This whole thing about he's the king's son, so he's supposed to be the next king. But he gives his clothes, his robe, he gives them to David. Not only that, but as we mentioned before, there's armor involved. And again, like we said, that speaks to more. But we need to remember that last verse, as in verse 5, because we're eventually going to get there at the beginning of the next chapter, because we're going to have these very same people being asked to now act in a way counter to what they're thinking about right now in verse 5. But we have here, as we get further in the chapter, that David goes from hero to villain that fast. I mean, super fast in the eyes of Saul only. But it's interesting when you think about it, because maybe you ask yourself, is it something that would be expected? Is it something that might be justified? Exaggeration can sometimes be both threaten us and scare us, especially when that exaggeration is talked about by other people, right? Verse 6, it happened that they were coming when David returned from killing the Philistine, and that the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang as they played, and they said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Then Saul became very angry, for this saying displeased him, and he said, they've ascribed to David 10,000s, but to me they've ascribed thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom? So Saul looked at David with suspicion from that day on. So one of the things we get when we get more into this chapter is that, again, we see God involved in what could be said still on both sides of the equation, right? He's fueling one side. At the same time, it seems he's also fueling the other side. But one of the things that's underneath that, and I think we need to consider when we look at chapters like these, as we've seen in the past with other types of stories, is that we still have a personal decision. Then we have God giving them over to that decision, which I like to describe as giving them over to themselves. And God says, you want to go there? God says, okay. Then let's see where this takes us, right? So in 10, now it came about on the next day that an evil spirit from God came mightily upon Saul, and he raved in the midst of the house. While David was playing the harp with his hand, as usual, and a spear was in Saul's hand. So Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I'll pin David to the wall. But David escaped from his presence twice. Now Saul was afraid of David, for the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. Therefore Saul removed him from his presence, and he appointed him as his commander of 1,000. And he went and came about the people. David was prospering in all his ways, for the Lord was with him. And Saul saw that he was prospering greatly, and it dreaded him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, and he went out and came in before them. So we know that going out and coming in, that's the wandering through, right? That they're just going through their daily time. They're being seen by the people. Both sides, both Saul and David are being seen. So we have that clear. It's kind of weird speak. So in verse 9, where Saul looked at David with suspicion from that day on, a conspiracy theory side of him crept up to the top. But then again, we jump to verse 10, where it says, now it came about on the next day that an evil spirit from God came mightily upon Saul. So it seems, yes, that all started with his suspicions and his jealousy on his own. But the author of Samuel makes it clear that this was not just what his brain was doing, but that this was from God's work as well. Yeah. That does make me think sometimes. Makes me step back. We look at these things because things are happening here that maybe in our time we're probably not comfortable talking about. Because I don't think we are. We look for ways around what this means. Could that mean that for them, but that would never mean that for us? Because we have God giving his Spirit to people. Getting the Holy Spirit, right, has been happening for a lot longer than the Gospels or the Scroll of Acts. But it's interesting that here we get the stories where we're reading in this fantastic set of scrolls in the Hebrew Scriptures, where we get that God is giving his Spirit, and he's taking his Spirit, and at times sending an evil spirit. That's going to leave a lot out on the table for people to talk about. So I'm going to leave you with that, to talk amongst yourselves, because everybody's going to have some theological position that they're probably ingrained in at this point. I'll let you ponder that amongst yourselves, because I'll sit where I'm comfortable in mine, right? I'm comfortable with God doing all three of those things for me or to me. I'm very comfortable with God giving and taking, not only leaving us to ourselves, but also sending his Spirit to move things along. So ponder that. And thank you for being with us tonight on another episode of Outside the Class with Samuel, our first scroll on the Dusty Feet.